All right, we are back and we're going to talk about trade fixtures, some characteristics of real property, and just generically some legal areas that affect real estate, and then we'll go through the quiz and we'll be finished for chapter 2. So first, trade fixtures. You'll need to understand what this is for the state exam. Trade fixtures are treated differently than regular fixtures. Remember that fixtures generally go with the land. Anything that's deemed to be a fixture runs with the land, stays with the land, and when it's sold, it should be included with the land. Trade fixtures, on the other hand, do not go with the transfer of the property. They are fixtures or improvements that a tenant has made to his property, and it's applicable in a commercial transaction, not a residential situation. So as a landlord, my company leases out a lot of the shopping center spaces to a lot of different tenants. So 2 examples of trade fixtures would be if we sign a lease with someone who wants to put in a spa or a salon into the property. So usually what we would deliver are basically the 4 walls of the inside with all of the utilities brought in, and then they would do the rest of the improvements to build it out to make it in a condition that they want to operate their business. So if you think about a salon, they need to install sinks, they need to install the chairs that attach the chairs to the ground, they need to install mirrors everywhere. Typically, all of those things would be fixtures and stay with the land. But because a tenant invests a great deal of money in those types of things and they need it to operate their business, the law across the board, but specifically in Ohio, says that trade fixtures then are the property of the tenant and not the landlord. And when the tenant leaves, the tenant takes those improvements with them, so they can rip out the sinks, the mirrors, the chairs. Now they have to put the property back in the condition it was, so they can't leave holes in the drywall and holes in the floor. They've got to put it back to the way that the property was delivered to them and make any necessary repairs. But all of those items belong to the tenant. There can be an exception. The landlord can write in the lease that all trade fixtures are to stay with the property when the tenant leaves. And if that is written in the lease and the tenant agrees to that, then the tenant cannot remove those. But without words otherwise, trade fixtures always are removed by the tenant when they leave. Another example of trade fixtures is if you would lease out to an operator who wants to operate a restaurant. Think about all of the equipment, the built-in coolers, the stove, the vents, all of that. Again, those things belong to the tenant. They were very expensive. The tenant brought them in. The tenant permanently attached them. But unless the lease says otherwise, the tenant takes those when they leave. So again, you will be tested on that for the state exam. So understand what trade fixtures are. All right, let's talk about some characteristics of real property. We've got 2 different types, economic and physical. We've talked about physical in chapter 1, but we'll review that again. First, let's talk about the economic characteristics. Those are scarcity, improvements, permanence of investment, and area preference. So scarcity, a lot of us don't think about land being scarce, and because it seems like everywhere you look there's land. But in reality, about 1/4 of the earth is land, the rest is all water. So when you really think about it, there is a limit to land, and it's not boundless, and so prices adjust based upon people's thoughts and needs at each particular time. So the economics of the value of land can be built around the concept of scarcity of land, especially scarcity perhaps in a particular area that happens to be hot. Another economic characteristic of real property is improvements. All building improvements can affect the value of a land, but we like to think about it as affecting it positively, but it can affect things negatively, and not just the improvements that you put on your land, but the improvements that your neighbor puts on their land. So if you build a nice big house that's expensive and tasteful on your land, and 10 years later somebody comes in and builds a auto mechanic operation on your neighboring site, even though they're putting improvements in and they're increasing the value of that land by adding improvements, in reality, it's probably decreasing the value of your land, because most people don't want to live in a $500,000 home that's next door to an auto mechanic operation. So again, improvements generally improve raw land, but overall can affect all the neighboring lands as well. Permanence of investment. There's a lot of capital and labor that's put into improving land, and I'm amazed. I live in Montgomery, and most of the houses in Montgomery were built in the 1970s, and for the last 10 years, developers have been coming in, or builders are coming in and buying up ranches and even 2 stories, sitting on half-acre lots, and tearing them down and building what I call McMansions, where your neighbor lives about this far away from you. And so they're raising perfectly good buildings that are houses that are only 40 years old. They may not be the most modern, but that is what the demand is for new houses, bigger, better. So that's what the builders and developers are doing, coming in and buying those up and tearing them down. So that's that's a big investment, and it's amazing to me that somebody comes in and buys a ranch for $310,000 and then and then demos it, and then builds a huge house on that property and sells it for $1.2 million. But that's what the market is looking for now. But with those improvements, we have to think about not just the physical houses or bricks and mortar. We also have to think about the utilities that are brought in, the sewer system, the road systems, all of that. And those are improvements that are made that usually are very, very long term. So whether you come in and tear the house down or not, after 30 years, all of those utilities and improvements are still there, which are beneficial and valuable for the new construction. And then the last economic characteristic is area, and that's known as situs, S-I-T-U-S. You should be familiar with that term, and really that's on page 25, and that just really means what you've all heard before: location. So the economic characteristics refer to the general geographics of the area, as well as the specific area. The example the book uses is you've got a town that's separated by a river, and the same houses are built, same amount of money costs to build both houses, but the houses on one side of the river may go for 30 grand more than the houses on the other side of the river, and that just may be because they have a better view of the downtown area. So location, again, is key. It's important. It always has been, always will be. Again, in Montgomery right now, in Blue Ash, that's a hot area to live. Mason is another very, very hot area to live. And prices are higher. People are willing to pay more for the identical improvement that is sitting in Montgomery or Mason than they would be if it's sitting in Lockland or Reading. So it's a matter of convenience, it's a matter of history, it's a matter of, what your neighbors and friends think about where you live. So it's not, the economics aren't based just on how much it costs to bring in the brick and mortar and lumber and roof, and to pay the labor to build it, but all of the intangibles that go with that. The physical characteristics we touched upon in Chapter 1, it's immobility. Remember, you can't move land, and uniqueness. Every piece of land is completely unique. It might be sitting right next door to each other. The builder might have built the same exact house on it, but the topography is different, the views are different. So that is a physical characteristic. Uniqueness, and you'll need to know this term for the test, non-homogeneity, and that just means uniqueness. And again, I don't know why the state thinks it's important to test you on that, but please be familiar with that word, and that's at the bottom of page 25, and it just means uniqueness. And then also the third characteristic that's a physical characteristic of real estate is indestructibility. Yes, the improvements can burn to the ground. They can be wiped away by a hurricane or a tornado, but nothing can destroy the land. The land is there. It's going to be there forever. So that is a physical characteristic. Let's talk about the laws affecting real estate. Again, you're not going to be expected to be a lawyer, but you need to understand all of the basics of the laws surrounding real estate. For a number of reasons. One, you're going to run into situations with your clients in transactions that you'll need to at least be familiar with the concepts. For example, you need to basically understand what probate is, in the event that you are either representing a buyer who's buying a house that is being sold by an estate, or you're representing the executor of a will who is selling the house on behalf of the estate of the deceased person. You also need to be aware very specifically of what the licensing laws are. Those are going to affect you directly if this is what you decide to do, to become a licensed salesperson or broker. They're very specific, and there's continuing education requirements and other laws that you're going to have to abide by in order to keep your license valid. So we're going to talk about those later in other chapters, and you'll touch on all of these basically in your real estate law class. The other part of law that you need to understand is contract law. You're going to be writing contracts all the time. So it's very, very important that you understand at least the very basics of contract law. When I say you're going to be writing contract, I mean you're going to be filling in the blanks on a contract form. For test purposes, if they ever ask you about that, can you write a contract? Can you draft a contract? The answer is no. That's you would be doing the unauthorized practice of law, and you could lose your license over that. You are permitted to fill in the blanks on a purchase contract. You are not permitted to fill in the blanks on a land installment contract. We'll talk about that briefly in one of the other chapters. That's a very statutorily driven area of the law. It used to be popular 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's a form of seller financing. I've not run into that even in my practice of law in the last 20 years. So if there's ever a land installment contract involved, you've got to talk to your broker and get a lawyer involved in that. You cannot fill the blanks in on that. That is a big no-no in Ohio. And then we also need to understand agency law. You're acting as an agent for your broker, and you're also acting as a sub-agent for your seller or your buyer. and there are duties that are owed, common law duties that are owed under Ohio agency law if you are acting in that capacity. So again, we'll briefly touch on all of those things in later chapters, and you'll go into much more in depth of that when you take your real estate law class. So let's look at the Unit 2 quiz on page 29. 1. Real estate generally includes all of the following except 1, or A, trees, B, air rights, C, annual crops, D, mineral rights. I don't like this question, but the answer is annual crops. We know it's really pick the best answer here, right? We know trees go with the land. Air rights, remember you own up until the heavens above. Mineral rights or subsurface rights. Annual crops, I guess we're supposed to assume that these are tenant farmer crops, so those would not be part of the real estate if it was transferred. 2, a woman rents space in a commercial building where she operates a bookstore. In the bookstore, she has installed large reading tables fastened to the walls and bookshelves that create aisles from the front of the store to the back. These shelves are bolted to both the ceiling and the floor. Which of the following best characterizes the content of the bookstore? A, the shelves and tables are trade fixtures and will transfer when the property owner sells the building. B, the shelves and tables are trade fixtures and may properly be removed by the woman before her lease expires, and the tenant would be responsible to the landlord for any damage that their removal caused to the premises. C, because the woman is a tenant, the shelves and tables are fixtures and may not be removed except with the building owner's permission. And D, because the shelves and the table are attached to the building, they are treated the same as other fixtures. So the right answer is B. They are trade fixtures because it's a commercial lease. See that in the first line of the question. She installed them, and being trade fixtures, she must remove them before the end of the term, and she's responsible for fixing any damage to the landlord's property. 3, the term non-homogeneity refers to A, scarcity, B, immobility, C, uniqueness, and D, indestructibility. See, I told you, you're going to have to understand what that word means. It's uniqueness. You're just going to have to memorize that. For another term for personal property is A, realty, B, fixtures, C, chattels, D, fructus naturals. So I'm a bad teacher. I did not teach that to you. Personal property is also known as chattels. You do need to know that for the exam. Personal property equals chattels. Realty is, of course, real estate. Fixtures, we learned, are attached to real estate, whether they're actually affixed or annexed or constructively annexed. Their fixtures are part of the real estate, so they're not personal property. And fructus naturals are natural growing trees and plants, and we did learn that those are part of the real estate. So just by process of elimination, even if I wasn't a bad teacher, the answer would be chattels. But remember, chattels equals personal property. 5, a property owner wants to use water from a river that runs through the property to irrigate a potato field. To do so, the owner is required by state law to submit an application to the Department of Water Resources describing in detail the plan for beneficial use of the water. If the department approves the owner's application, it will issue a permit allowing a limited amount of river water to be diverted onto his property. Based on these facts, it can be assumed that this property owner's states relies on which rule of law? A, riparian rights, B, littoral rights, C, doctrine of prior appropriation, D, doctrine of highest and best use. If you remember, riparian rights are generically water rights, and more specifically rights that go along and associated with rivers. And as a riparian owner, you have certain rights to use the water, provided your property is immediately adjacent to the water. So that would not be the right answer. Littoral rights are a type of riparian rights, and they're associated with lakes. Remember LL. And the same rights go along with littoral rights as riparian rights, and you have to own property that's immediately adjacent to the lake, and that's not this situation, so that's not applicable. C is the right answer. Doctrine of prior appropriation. Remember, appropriation always equals a governmental permit. So that's what the situation is. 6. A man inherited a piece of vacant land. He removed and sold all of the topsoil, limestone, and gravel. At his death, he left the property to his daughter. Which is true? A. The daughter inherits nothing because the property no longer exists. B. The daughter inherits the property as is. C. The daughter owns the gravel, limestone, and topsoil no matter where it is. And D. The man's estate must restore the property to its original condition. All right. So remember, the guy dies and leaves the property to his daughter after he removes the topsoil limestone. So A, the daughter inherits nothing because the property no longer exists. Well, that's kind of silly. There's something there. It goes down to the bottom of the earth. So that's not, and when you own land, you own down to the bottom of the earth and you own the airspace above. So that's not the right answer. The daughter inherits the property as is. That is the correct answer. If dad has already sold the property or part of the property, that's his right to do so. And he doesn't have to sell all of the property. He can sell subsurface rights, which is what he's done here. And his daughter inherits the rest of the property. So C, the daughter owns the gravel, limestone, and topsoil no matter where it is. That's, again, kind of silly. It's been sold to somebody else and you can't get that back. And the man's estate must restore the property to its original condition. Again, silly, because the man, while he was alive, has the right to sell portions of his real property, which is what he's done. 7. In determining whether an item is real or personal property, a court would not consider which of the following: A, the cost of the item when it was purchased. B, whether its removal would cause severe damage to the real estate. C, whether the item is clearly adapted to the real estate. D, any relevant agreement of the parties in their contract of sale. Well, the answer is A. They're never going to look at what the cost of the item is. Always will look at whether, removing the item would cause any severe damage to the real property. They'll look at whether the item has been so ingrained into the real property that it actually becomes part of it. I remember my example of my garden and all of the things out there. If I would kind of remove all of that, it wouldn't be the same thing. And any relevant agreement of the parties in their contract, certainly if their contract somewhat addressed it one way or the other, the contract is going to rule. So the answer is the cost. That's never considered by a court in determining whether it's a fixture or personal property. 8. Which of the following is a physical characteristic of the land? Remember, we talked about physical characteristics and economic characteristics. So when you're going through these answers, just think about what's physical. A, indestructibility. B, improvements. C, area preference. D, scarcity. While C and D are economics, those are not physical things, right? They're kind of intangible things. Improvements are something that's physical, but it's not a physical characteristic of the land. What the answer is indestructibility. Remember, it's indestructibility. What were the other ones? The uniqueness and the immobility. Those are the physical characteristics of a land. And indestructibility, again, means that it's you can't destroy a piece of land. You can certainly have the improvements on it destroyed. You can take away some of the subsurface minerals, but you can never really destroy a piece of real property. 9. Which of the following describes the acts by which real property can be converted into personal property? Remember, real property now becomes personal property. What's the word that I taught you about that? A, severance, B, accession, C, conversion, D, attachment. D is wrong. Attachment is the exact opposite. That's where you take personal property and turn it into real property. Conversion, we didn't talk about. That may sound like it works, but remember, we didn't talk on that subject matter at all. Accession is where property or soil is added to your property and it increases your property. So that has nothing to do with converting something from real property to personal property. The correct answer is A, severance, when you take something that's attached to real property and you cut it away, you sever it apart from the real property. Then it's a separate and alone piece of property and it's personal property. 10. While moving into a newly purchased home, the buyer discovered that the seller had taken the ceiling fan that hung over the dining room table. The seller had not indicated that the ceiling fan would be removed, and the contract did not address this issue. Which statement is true? A, ceiling fans are usually considered real estate. B, the ceiling fan belongs to the seller. C, ceiling fans are considered trade fixtures. D, ceiling fans are considered personal property. The correct answer is A, and we went through that example. That's attached and deemed to be a fixture, part of the real estate, goes with the sale, unless the seller specifically indicates that they are taking the property with them. 11. A buyer purchased a parcel of land and immediately sold the mineral rights to an oil company. The buyer gave up which of the following? A, air rights, B, surface rights, C, subsurface rights, D, occupancy rights. The correct answer is subsurface rights. Remember, any minerals or oils or anything that is in below the dirt and the ground are subsurface. So that's what he sold. 12. A truckload of lumber that a homeowner purchased has been left in the driveway for use in building a porch. The lumber is considered A, real property, B, personal property, C, a chattel that is real property, D, a trade or chattel fixture. The answer is B, personal property. It's lumber. Once the porch is built, it would be real property. But while it's sitting there, it is personal property. C, a chattel that's real property. That's incorrect because a chattel is by definition personal property. And a trade or chattel fixture is not appropriate because a trade fixture relates to a commercial lease. 13. Method of annexation, adaptation to real estate, and agreement between the parties are the legal tests for determining whether an item is A, a trade fixture or personal property, B, real property or real estate, C, a fixture or personal property, D, an improvement. The answer is C, a fixture or personal property, because if it's a fixture, it's part of real property, right? 14. Parking spaces in multi-unit buildings, water rights, and similar things of value that convey with the property are classified as A, covenants, B, embellments, C, chattels, D, appurtenances. We learned about this in the first clip on this chapter. Certainly not covenants. Embellments, remember those are tenant crops. Chattels is personal property, and these things really aren't personal property. They're appurtenances, D, things that run with the land and go with the real property, i.e. parking spaces, water rights. Remember our riparian rights. When you buy a piece of property that is adjacent to the land, you get those riparian rights. They run with the land. So they're an appurtenance. 15. A paint company purchases a large tract of scenic forest land and builds several tin shacks there to store used turpentine and other items. Which statement is true? A, the company's action constitutes improvements of the property. B, the chemicals are considered appurtenances. C, the tin shacks are considered trade fixtures. And D, altering the property in order to store waste is not included in the bundle of legal rights? The answer here is that the company's action constitutes improvements of the real property. So they purchase a tract of forest land and build tin shacks to store things. Some people may not think that's an improvement. Some people may think that's a detriment, but they have improved the land by building an improvement on it. 16. A property owner's land is located along the banks of a river. The owner's water rights are called, we've been through this a number of times, riparian rights. Riparian equals river. 17. A property owner's bundle of legal rights entitles the owner to do all of the following except A, sell the property to a neighbor, B, exclude utility meter readers, C, erect no trespassing signs, and D, enjoy the profits from its ownership. So the bundle of rights gives you a lot of rights, but you cannot exclude utility meter readers. There are some restrictions and that you must abide by, including zoning laws, and I don't know why they threw this utility meter reader in there, but that's the right answer. 18. According to law, a trade fixture is usually treated as A, a fixture, which means it's real property, B, an easement, C, personalty, D, a license. The answer is C, personalty, because even though it's permanently attached by the tenant to the landlord's property, the tenant is allowed to take it, and so thus it's deemed to be personal property. 19. A buyer is interested in a house that fits most of her needs, but it is located in a busy area where she is not sure she wants to live. Her concern about the property's location is called A, physical deterioration, B, area preference, C, permanence of investment, and D, immobility. The answer is area preference. Remember, area preference equals situs equals location, location, location. So even though the house is perfect for her, the actual improvement is, the area is not. And then 20, which of the following is considered personal property? A, a wood-burning fireplace, B, awnings, C, bathtub, D, patio furniture. It's patio furniture. The first three items would all deemed to be fixtures that are, and they are indeed permanently affixed to the real property. So that's it for Chapter 2. I know that was a lot of information. Go ahead and read the chapter and take it all in, and then also don't forget to go through the quiz again at the end of Chapter 2 and put your name on a paper and the numbers with the correct answers, and try to do that on your own again and see where you end up. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.